Well, good morning. It is so good to be out. We're thankful for your presence. We're thankful for this opportunity that we are blessed with to come out and study God's Word, to edify one another. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 18. We have made it to Matthew chapter 18. We have 10 chapters to finish the book. We've been in the book for quite a while. It is a significant book. And then next Sunday starts the new quarter, in which Vance will be taking the adult class, and he'll be taking the teen class too that week because I'll be gone. But for the summer quarter, I will be with the teens, and then when we pick up in the fall, we're going to pick up where we left off and finish the book of Matthew, and then we will see where you guys want to go next. But for now, Matthew chapter 18. In verse 1, at the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, the wording, at the same time, lets us know that this comes immediately at the end of these events, where in chapter 17, Jesus has come to Capernaum. And so this is in Capernaum. At that same time, it says that the disciples are talking. Mark and Luke give us a lot more information. They tell us that they have come into a certain house, right? And so we think that it's likely Peter's house, because Peter lived in Capernaum. And so they're probably in Peter's house. They have been talking amongst themselves, and they have been jostling amongst themselves with this idea about who is the greatest in the kingdom. And it's interesting for us to ponder about these men whom Jesus has chosen, who are walking with him, who are discipling after him, who are learning from him, and they've seen him do all these incredible things, and they're arguing about who is going to be the greatest. I mean, just to get the cat out of the bag, who is the greatest in the kingdom? Jesus. I mean, he is it. He is the preeminent one, that in all things he should have the preeminence. Jesus is the greatest. But it's human nature, isn't it? We want to volley for position. When we have our minds set on worldly things and the way that kingdoms are fashioned in the world, when we look at the way kingdoms are set up, there's always a preeminent person. There's a cabinet. People hold positions and offices, and it gives them rank and file and who pulls the most weight, right? Well, the kingdom of heaven, which is used 32 or 34 times in the book of Matthew and nowhere else, it's not going to be that same way. And another thing, before we really get going, at the end of Matthew chapter 17, Jesus, for the second time, elucidates on the fact that he is going to be the suffering servant, that he is going to go die, that he is going to be buried, he is going to be murdered. And Jesus himself is speaking of abasement. And the disciples are thinking of advancement. Pretty clear contrast of demeanors and dispositions between these disciples who are trying to learn after the perfect Son of God and their worldly background. Matthew 18 is the fourth of fifth teachings within the book. And they ask this question, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Jesus, we've been talking about this for a while, and we need you to step up and settle it. Just go ahead and put us in order. Who's going to be the greatest? This is exactly contrary to everything that Jesus has taught that Christianity is going to be about. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 3, blessed are the meek, right? The poor in spirit. This is not being poor in spirit, is it? This is not being meek and lowly. This is not humility. This is worldly thinking and wanting to be the one who is going to be important. In Ephesians chapter number 4, the first 3 verses, Paul says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you're called. Notice these characteristics: with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Now, is this argument about who's the greatest, is that endeavoring unity? Is that endearing and engendering a spirit of cohesiveness? No, that is absolute division and separation of powers and rank. It's totally contrary. In Philippians chapter 2, in the first 5 verses, Paul writes, if there be any consolation, any bowels of mercy, he says, fulfill ye my joy, being like-minded, having the same mind towards one another. And he talks about let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but let each one esteem others better than themselves. Let not a man look out on his own things, but let him look also on the things of others. Have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Jesus is going to be teaching and continuing to teach a disposition that the Christians are to have. In verse number 2, it says, and Jesus called a little child unto him and set him in the midst of them. Now, one thing we notice is that the child came to him. Jesus was of such a nature. Jesus was of such a type of man that he could call a little child and the child would come. Jesus called the little child, and maybe they're in Peter's house, and Jesus may have been around. This may be Peter's child. We don't know for a fact, but just it kind of makes sense that they would be at Peter's house. They had been there before. Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law, didn't he, when she was sick of a fever. They're in Capernaum, but Jesus calls this child, and the child comes, and Jesus sets this child in the midst of them. Another interesting note. They're arguing about greatness in the kingdom, and Jesus doesn't grab Peter, does he? Jesus doesn't grab Peter and say, now this guy is the Pope and is the greatest in the kingdom. He doesn't do that. He grabs a little child, and historically and contextually within the setting of the world in that day, children were viewed more as property. They were viewed more as something to look after and not to look up to. They weren't valued like adult men. They had more value in the Jewish community than they did in the Greek and Roman world. If in the Greek and Roman world, in the Gentile world, if a person had a baby they didn't want, they would abort it. If there was something wrong with that child, they would abort it, kill it. The Jews had a higher view of life than that, but children were down here on the totem pole, if you will. And so he makes this statement. Verily I say to you, except you be converted and become as little children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Well, as we talk about Jesus in the contextual, historical context where children don't matter so much, boy, didn't Jesus change that? I mean, Jesus, his birth was announced, and when he was born, the angels sang in the field. The king got word of it, and it moved the king to try to take him out. This insignificant child. No. Jesus changed the significance regarding children, didn't he? He was the most significant child to ever come into the world. He said here, except you be converted. You see, children aren't threatening, are they? You walk in a dark alley and you hear footsteps behind you and you turn to see a little child. You're not afraid of that, are you? Children aren't threatening. What about this? When we have that tough, intimidating, domineering disposition, we're not like Jesus, are we? That child went to Jesus. And he says you got to be converted and to be as little children. Now this word converted is important. It's the word strepho. It means to turn. And the word is used in Luke epistrepho, which means to turn again. Epi is again, strepho to turn. And so it's a turning over, a new leaf, if you will. Epistrepho or strephos, to turn. And that's exactly what conversion is. It's to turn over from one way of living to another. And he says you're going to have to be converted. You're going to have to be transformed. You're going to have to become something that you're not naturally. And you're going to have to become as this little child. Now, in what way is Jesus talking about becoming as a child?
A child is innocent. Even when Jesus was born, his life was threatened. And as you can see, especially at school, these little children that are in school are looking up to the teacher and adults, and you can direct them in the way that they need to go that particular day or whatever the case might be, but they're looking for instructions to go whatever they need to do.
Yeah. And a lot of times they will follow you blindly. They have a faith and a trust that is pure. We talked about how children aren't threatening. Children also aren't good at deceiving, are they?
You ask a child something and they're going to tell you the truth.
They're going to tell you the truth. Children aren't good at deceiving. Even if they try to tell a lie, they are miserable failures at lying to their parents. I mean, when our kids tell us something's not true, we know immediately. What about us? When we are good at hiding ourselves, at deceiving, at saying things that aren't true, making people believe lies, we're not like Jesus, are we? Jesus was not like that. And so the child here is held up as an ideal of humility. Not only of humility, but unconcern for social status. I mean, the disciples are arguing about their rank in the kingdom. Children don't care about that, do they? Children are unconcerned with the pecking order of authority. They just want to get along and play, have a good time. They're unconcerned with those things. Here Jesus uses this picture of a child as the ideal for a Christian being, a believer being of a certain disposition, of a certain way of going about things, not focusing on things that the world would focus on as like power and rank and order and prestige and prowess. And children aren't thinking along those lines. 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verse 20. Somebody get 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verse 20. And Paul mentions something to us
about being like children and not being like children.
Brothers,
Do not be children in your thinking, be infants and evil, but in your thinking be mature.
Exactly. In your understanding, grow up. In your understanding, be mature. In your understanding, don't be a child. But when it comes to evil, when it comes to malice, when it comes to hateful, when it comes to those things, be children. Children have a quality about them that is worth imitating. They get over things quickly, don't they? They move on. They love freely. They love openly. In the world, people go after the power order, and Jesus didn't do that. Jesus went to serve the meek and the lowly, and that's not the natural way of things in this world. Be children. A childlike faith, as you see on the board in front of you, is a Christ-like faith. Maybe that will help us. We have to be converted. Except you be converted. That is changed. That is having the ability to accept the low place. Did not in Philippians chapter 2 and it was about verse 8 or so, that Christ emptied himself, made himself of no reputation, took upon him the form of a servant. He accepted that low place. Oh, he came from glory. But he humbled himself, became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Philippians 2, around 7 through 9. He humbled himself. Now, this is not talking about asceticism. Is anyone familiar about what asceticism or what ascetics do? They harm themselves. They're like monks. They seclude themselves. They will do self-harm, all because I've got to abase myself. I'm worthy of the harm. That's not what Jesus is talking about. And we'll talk about some of that in our lesson today when we get down here in around verse number 8 and 9. But in our lesson, we'll take it from Mark chapter 9 later on. Jesus was the greatest. He says, except you be converted and become as little children. Verse 4, whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Now, notice this. He says, whosoever humbles himself, as the little child is humble. The little child doesn't think himself to be some great thing. I mean, in his little imagination, he may play like he's a superhero, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who think I'm better than you just simply because my name is Robby Everso. I'm better than you. Children don't do that. Children don't think that they're the best things at sliced bread. Children just go along. They're humble. Whosoever therefore will humble himself as this child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Greatness starts with humility. Jesus shows them this. You remember at the Last Supper, they are gathered together, and it's a customary thing for them to wash their feet, and nobody has stepped up to do this. And maybe it's the same case then as it is here. Maybe Bartholomew's telling Thomas that he should wash feet, and Matthew is telling Mark that he should wash feet, and Bartholomew is telling another one that he should wash that. And what does Jesus do? He gets up and he girds himself with a towel. And he begins to wash their feet. He begins to serve them. John 13, and he tells them, you call me Master and Lord, and you say well, because I am. But if I, your Master and Lord, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. We find out that no one who is sent is greater than him that sent him. And the servant is not greater than his master. Well, in that type of relationship, we're the servant. Jesus is the master. We're the servant. He's the Lord, and he served. What does that make us? Servants. When we talk about being converted and being transformed, you look at the great men of history, someone like Paul, who was on the fast track to becoming the who's who and the what's what in Israel. Transformed. He was so powerful, and yet after being converted to Christ, the Corinthians would say about him that he is weak and his speech is contemptible and that he's really nothing to be afraid of. He had to tell them, look, the signs of an apostle were wrought among you. You are my work in the Lord. And if you don't change your attitude, I'm going to come and I'm not going to spare when I get there. You think I'm weak and feeble. Don't make me come there. Get your attitude right. You are my work in the Lord. But Paul became an extremely humble person. There was a man named William Wilberforce. He was a British politician, and he was very successful in the slave trade until he became a Christian. And then for decades, he fought to end slavery, and in 1833, the Slavery Abolition Act was signed, and he fought for that for years. Someone that we probably know better, Lew Wallace, who was an agnostic, who was researching to try to disprove Christianity. And you know what happened when he did that? He became a believer. And then he wrote a very famous book, Ben-Hur, which is a story about Christ. And he completely changed his life. That's a transformation. That's being converted. That's what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus humbles the greatest of men. And what about us? He says in verse number 5, and whoso shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. What did Jesus tell Paul on the road to Damascus? Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Who art thou, Lord? I'm Jesus of Nazareth, whom you persecute. I didn't know. I was actually persecuting you. I was persecuting the people that believe in you. Yeah, Jesus said. However, we receive a believer of his, a child of God, is how we receive him. How we treat another Christian is how we treat him. Intimately connected. That's what family is, isn't it? Someone does your child wrong. Someone does your spouse wrong. Someone mistreats one of your animals. What have they done to you? They've offended you personally, because that's what family is. I thought I saw a hand. Okay. How we treat other people that believe in Christ is how we treat Christ. In verse 6, he makes a very important statement. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Now we need to remember that Jesus is using this child as a picture of the ideal believer. He's talking about people that believe in him. He's talking about Christians using the child as a metaphor, if you will. Now, what he says about little ones is true, but the child is not the focus. The child is just the object lesson that he's using. And it would have been stark. It would have been completely contrary to what they would be thinking, because children weren't anything special. It was the elders, the one with authority. And Jesus has completely flipped that on its head. And so he says, if you offend one of these little ones, he's talking about believers. He's talking about, John said, my little children, do not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. That's what we are to be. We are God's children. And so he's talking about believers. He says, if one offends the little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, that he were drowned into the depth of the sea. This millstone here, there are two different words, two different phrases in the Greek. There were millstones that were used at home domestically. A woman would use her own personal little handheld millstone to grind her grain and flour. But then there was also community millstones. And in the Greek, this phrase, what Jesus is talking about, is the millstone of a donkey. And this is a very large millstone that a donkey or an ox was hooked to roll it around. And they would do large batches as a community with that. And Jesus said that it would be better for that millstone to be hung around your neck and to be cast into the midst of the sea, as to cause a Christian to sin or to stumble. Now, what happens if something of that type of weight is tied around your neck and then you're thrown overboard? You're going to drown. Now, historically, I'm not saying that it never did happen, but Jews did not normally execute in that fashion. The Romans did, others did, but the Jews did not normally execute through drowning. Their normal mode of execution was what? Stoning. That's what they normally did, is they would stone someone. And when they got done, they was already buried under a big old heap of stones. This would be, I can't imagine drowning. But Jesus is using language here that would really grab at their constitution. It would grab them in the core. And it would be better to die that horrible, wretched death than to be guilty of offending and causing another Christian to sin and to stumble. In verse number 7, in 7 through 14, he gives warnings about causing Christians to sin. In verse 7, woe unto the world because of offenses. Jesus, do you know that there's bad people in the world? Jesus, do you know that there are going to be people in the world that attack Christians and that lay stumbling blocks before them? That yes. And he says, woe to the world because of that. Jesus is aware of all the trash and all the trials and all the things that the world tries to throw up to bring Christians into their fold. And how often are they successful? More successful than we would like to admit. Woe to the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense comes. We live in a fallen world. We live in a world in which Satan has his way. And God allows men to walk after their own way, does he not? He allows men to make their own choices to sin. but he will have the last say. And it's in this. It's in this scripture. It's in this very text that shows us that we can let go of the bitterness, and we can let go of the hurt, and we can let go and move on from the things that people have done to us, because God notices, He knows it, and He is going to have the last say about it. Woe to whom the offenses come. Woe to whom cause the offense. In verse number 8 and 9, wherefore if thy hand or thy foot offend thee, cut them off, cast them from thee. For it is better for thee to enter into life halt or maimed, rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into everlasting fire. And if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. It is better for thee to enter into life with 1 eye, rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hellfire. Notice in verse 8, he calls it everlasting fire. In verse 9, he uses the term hellfire, and they're the same thing. They're the exact same thing. What is he pushing at here? He's not pushing self-mutilation. He's not telling us to literally cut our hands and feet off or our eye out, pluck our eye out. Because you know what we could do? We could sin with the other hand. We could sin with the other foot. We could sin with the other eye. The transformation has to be within. It starts within. That is what this is about. But what he's pushing at is the radical nature in which we are to pursue righteousness. When you think about the scheme of redemption, when you think about some time in eternity past, the Godhead, before even the world was formed and began, had this plan to create the world and mankind and to redeem us from our sins. And that the second member of the Godhead, the eternal Word, would leave heaven and empty himself of all the glory and come put on flesh to be made like we are, to be brutally murdered and die. But then to exercise his power and rise from the dead, procuring our redemption, and to ascend back to heaven to one day come and get us to live with. That's pretty radical, isn't it? I mean, the scheme of redemption, when you think about it, is radical. And he is saying you need to be radical about living a holy life. The Hebrews writer says, pursue peace with all men and holiness, without which shall no man see the Lord. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. We've got to be radical. These statements convey an attitude towards sin and not actions towards self. This isn't about hurting ourselves. This is about an attitude towards sin. Transformation is from the inside out, not the outside in. A blind man can still have sinful, horrid thoughts. Sin is a self-control issue. But the strong metaphor that Jesus uses here does depict a reality. I mean, someone can have gangrene on their arm, and guess what? To live, what are they going to need to do? They're going to need to cut it off. They're going to need to amputate. There could be cancer in the leg, and it'd be necessary to amputate so the rest of the body can live. It's a true principle, but the spiritual meaning is be radical in your pursuit of holy living and righteousness. What verse 8 calls everlasting fire, verse 9 calls Gehenna, the hellfire, and this is the punishment after death. Now verse number 10, take heed. That's pay attention. Be intentional. that you despise not one of these little ones. For I say unto you, that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. For the Son of Man is come to save that which is lost. Now, to despise is to regard with contempt. It is to treat with disdain. And he's saying here that we should not despise or treat with contempt believers. And then he mentions angels. Now, we're going to have a sermon on angels. We did, I think, maybe my first year here. We're going to have another one. And we're going to cover this in more detail. There's a lot of misconception about the angels here and the idea of guardian angels. This verse says nothing about guardian angels. People have that idea and they use this verse and stick it into their idea. I'll give you one verse, Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 14. Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 14. Not Philemon. Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 14. Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation? Now, angels are ministering spirits. And we don't know who and how and all, but there's no text in the Bible that says that we have personal guardian angels, but that there are angels that are ministering spirits. The idea in Matthew chapter 18 is that you despise and you treat with contempt someone who has access, or God's angels have access to them. And those angels have constant access to the throne of heaven. So what is he saying? God knows. If you mistreat a Christian, God knows. God is not unaware of what is going on in this world. God is not unaware of your struggles and your pain and your hurt and your abuse and your misuse. God is aware. He says that in heaven, notice that, not on earth, but in heaven, his angels do always behold the face of the Father which is in heaven. And to put the cherry on top, it's the express purpose that Jesus emptied himself of glory and came to earth, for the Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost. One comment about that verse, some suggest that it doesn't belong, that it was added by the scribes that were transcribing Matthew. There are some versions that do not have verse number 11. There are some versions that keep it in brackets or have it as a footnote. Here's what I'll say about that. It is my opinion that the scribes copied it into the book, that it was left in the book, number one, to help as a transition to the following verses, and because it teaches the truth. What does Luke 19:10 say? For the Son of Man hath come to seek and to save that which is lost. It's still in the Bible in Luke 19:10. It's not even a question that it belongs. So in Matthew chapter 18 and verse 11, it teaches the truth.
In his life, he was setting examples wherever he went. And in my mind, I go back to John the Baptist. Whenever he said he wanted to baptize him, he said, I'm not worthy. And he said, John, baptize me.
Yeah.
There, he set an example for everyone. Even Jesus was baptized.
Right.
And all through the scriptures, of what God has given us to learn and look and read and put in our lives is there for our learning and share with others.
That's right. We're out of time. Thank you so much for your attention and participation.